Welcome again. This is, like to say, the third of a series of crisis leadership webinars I've been hosting since this whole pandemic COVID thing launched. And it was interesting. I just did one, I'll say Tuesday, I think, with human resource professionals. And if you can imagine, I was like shocked. There was 800 people there. And it was quite interesting, the comments and the conversation that those folks are facing. Some of you know Mike, you know me well. Sheila, not so well. Others maybe not as well. But I've had quite an interesting career in the service as an infantry soldier, and then working for Red Cross, leading fairly significant disaster responses, as well as being an executive and a leader of huge, large, and sometimes complex and funny, and funny, peculiar organizations as I've gone through my career. In the last few years, I've been working in the education and consulting around organizational design and coaching, leadership, and the like. It's been quite a bit of fun. This is the conversation today is going mostly around, pardon me, around planning and how to organize yourself in the middle of all this, and then what to do as we come out of it. And of course, I've got a little bit of a tickle that as we start. But as Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. So when he was fighting Evander Holyfield, that's what he said when somebody asked him if he had a plan when he got in the ring with one of the best fighters that ever existed. And in the military, we always had a saying called, your plan is only as good as first contact with the enemy, and their whole goal is to upset your plan. So how can we organize ourselves as we approach being a leader in COVID, leader in a COVID response, and leading our teams as we go through? I've referred to this story maybe in an earlier webinar, but it's a good contextual framework for what we're going to talk about today. That in 2002, I can't recall exactly when, I think it was early in 2001, I was a disaster management director for Red Cross in Ontario. And one of the first responses that I was involved with Red Cross was a small plane crash into Lake Erie. So there's an island, you may have heard of Pelee Island near Windsor. It sticks into, it's out in the middle of Lake Erie. And in wintertime, sometimes it's available by ferry, but often not because of ice conditions, and people fly back and forth quite a bit. And on a return trip, a private charter crashed into the ice, through the ice, and into the lake with about 14 people or 16 people were on board, and they were all killed in the accident. And it was tragic, obviously, in every sense of the word. The people on the plane were all from one small community, lawyers and doctors and leaders, a lot of family people. The pilot and his girlfriend and others were on board. So it was just, it would have been tragic, period, but it was doubly tragic just because of the circumstances, and impacted a small village in southern Ontario quite dramatically. It was also very complex, and if you've never been involved with such a thing, it's a complex operation, because you have the airline, you have the airline manufacturer, you have the Ontario Provincial Police, you have fire departments, the Coast Guard because it was in the water. You have county and municipal officials. You have also the Transportation Safety Board involved. So it was all of these egos and all of these organizations coming to play as we responded to this, and organizations on top of that, like Red Cross and some other local non-for-profits that were supporting the incident. And I was always struck by what the Ontario Provincial Police took the lead in the beginning of the investigation of what happened there. And their inspector, who was in charge of the incident scene and the response, in the fire hall we were working on, we had a big whiteboard, and right at the top of the whiteboard he wrote, our goal is to recover the casualties, return the casualties to the families, treat the families with utmost respect, and investigate the cause of the accident. Which I thought was quite powerful, because it framed your work you were doing in that very complex situation And if you ever got your ego ever got a little bit ahead of you or away from you, all you had to do is look at this big board, and there was this mission statement for this particular operation that was powerful, it was intimate, and it kept you focused on what's important. And so what I'd like to do as we go through this is just talk about how do we do that if we're leading a crisis? And in this case, how do we do that when we're specifically leading a crisis within this pandemic and this COVID-19 world that we're living in? How do we get our organizations together? And really, it's not so much about responding to the pandemic. It's how do we organize our organizations in a way that we not only come through this, but we come through with this in a healthier place and be able to rejig ourselves and reorganize ourselves for whatever will come forward. Because I would argue, and many would, that we can't go back. Like even if you look at a university, for example, they're full of bricks and mortars and kitchens and beds and rooms, and those may never be used again in some regard, or some number of them, because people have learned that you can go to school online, or you can do something different. You, as a worker, as a board member, I'm on a board of a significant provincial organization, which just last year bought a brand new building for 130 employees and an organization, all the stuff that goes in behind an organization. Well, it's 2/3, 3/4 empty every day, yet the work is still happening. So as an organization, do we need that building? Now we're in double trouble because we hadn't sold the building that we moved out of. So we're stuck right now. Commercial real estate is not doing so well. But more as an organization, like what do we do with this space? Do we need all those people? Do we need all of that room? And how can we rejig as we go forward? So in the interim, in this piece of time that we're operating in right now between the onset of the pandemic and whenever we start getting back to whatever it's going to look like in the next 3 to 4 to 5, 6 months from now, I would argue that as a team, as an organization, especially your executive and your leadership team, you really need to invest in an organizational rallying cry. And what does that sound airy-fairy? But I would say that what you really need is clear direction for the entire organization for this fixed period of time. And you determine what your rallying cry is. What is important for us to do right now so we not just thrive or survive COVID, but we put ourselves in a position to survive. And I don't have the answer necessarily for each individual organization on the call, but I would say that you really need to focus on what does that look like? How has COVID affected your organization, and how can you keep everybody focused on what's the right work to do? And everybody on specifically your leadership team needs to buy into this, agree to it, and commit. Like, I mean, commit with a capital C. And to help develop it, I would suggest that you get everybody in a room and you ask this simple question: if we had to accomplish one thing during the next 6 months, what would it be? Have everybody write down the answer. You can estimate a time frame between, I would say, at least 6 months. Maybe it's 12 months given the circumstance with COVID. And have people consider the question, like, if we don't accomplish this particular task, will we have failed? Will our organization survive? And that really focuses the mind. There's a great line, off the top of my head, I can't recall who said it, but nothing focuses the mind like a hanging in the morning. I think it might have been Mark Twain, but I'm not 100% sure. But if everybody is focused on survival and singularly focused on the one thing that allows survival, then you will be in a good stead. If everybody's disparate and everybody's thinking about different things, it will be a challenge for you to get through this and survive as an organization. Because I truly believe you might get through the COVID and the response, but you will never be able to go back to what you were. And if you're not prepared to move forward, then I suggest that you're likely, arguably, that you'd fail. And when you have all of these answers from your leadership team, or if you have a small organization, it should be everybody within your organization, from the receptionist right up to the boss, to the executive director, or the CEO, or the president. And what you want to do is try to facilitate this. And if it's possible, I would bring somebody in, but if not, it's not always possible. but how can you facilitate this that you can encourage everyone not to sit on their hands? One of the ways of doing that is post up all of the answers that you get, excuse me, and make sure that the leadership group goes last in this exercise. Because if the CEO or the president or the executive director or the manager or director, whatever it might be, goes first, as soon as whatever they say out loud will taint everybody else's opinion. They'll go, oh, the boss thinks this, so I'm not going to say what I think. So you want to make sure when you facilitate this, that you get everyone engaged and you ask directed, open-ended questions and point them at the quiet people in the room, and start with the lowest ranking people and move your way to the top so that you engage people. I don't think it happens too often in civilian courts, but in a military justice system, on a courts martial, the lowest ranking person in the jury casts their vote first, and then they go in reverse order of rank. So the highest ranking person casts the rank, like, so that it hopefully, and in theory, and hopefully in practice, that higher ranking person doesn't jade somebody else's opinion. And then we want to write down all these goals and ask for clarifying statements. So if something's not clear, then probe into it a little bit. We're not looking at a gigantic exercise here. We're looking at maybe a couple hours, a half a day. So you have the pressure of time on this, that people are on the clock so that they have to respond. Eventually, as you're doing this, there'll be one goal that will rise to the top. And as it gets closer to the top, then you need to really push back a little bit to make sure that people are clear about the discrepancies and why somebody thinks that their goal that maybe is in second or third place is most important. You need to do this so that everyone, first off, has a chance to be heard, and that their voice gets heard in this. Because when the last thing you want to walk away from an exercise like this, especially in a crisis situation, as we are in right now with COVID with our organizations, consensus is the kiss of death. If the best you can say about this exercise is we had consensus, that's terrible. You have to have agreement. And you have to have, or if you don't have agreement, you have to have everyone committed that maybe it's not my first choice, but I'm behind this. And that's when you put the stake in the ground. And that is your rallying cry. So what could a rallying cry look like? A rallying cry could look like, at the end of this exercise, at the end of COVID, we will serve all of our clients to the best of our ability, and we will give away all of our product and our services. Quite frankly, in the consulting world, that's like people like me, I think that's the right thing to do. Like right now, I'm doing all sorts of consulting to bring value to my clients so that they survive and grow. And I'm okay with that. If you were in a service business, maybe your rallying cry that, for example, I have a friend, a general contractor, and maybe his rallying cry is that he has to figure out how to maintain his highly skilled trades that he works with so that when he comes out of this, that he has the ability to get back into business quickly and efficiently. And then everyone votes on that and selects it. So that's the short term. That's survival mode, I would argue. So as we get through that, then how does it look like when we move beyond? If it's July, not likely, probably at least November or next year and beyond. So how can we reset our organization? Well, I would argue a term that I've rephrased from financial exercise is zero-based planning. Like picture starting over. What's worked well during COVID as you manage through COVID that you can carry forward? Is it working from distance, remote education, remote learning, smaller teams? What are those things that are working well now? And how can that move to, like if you're doing zero-based budgeting, one of the things that you do is each year you take a program and you say, if we had to start this program over again, well, how much financial issues and how would we make it work? But I'm talking about zero-based. If you're going to hit the reset on Paratus Education, which is my company, and say, okay, COVID has completely changed the environment in which we're working. What would it look like if we started over? And we're seeing that all the time. A lot of organizations I'm involved with are finally doing the things that they always said they wanted to do, but didn't have time and space to do. And COVID, the pandemic, and the social isolation is creating that space for them to start over again and re-implement new tools and new systems that, that are available to them. It also, what you really want to do is increase responsibility and accountability for the people that work for you. And how can you redesign that? Well, bring these smart people together. I was always amazed when we were doing disaster responses and the like, that the power that people had that were able to do the work that brought up these brilliant ideas that the senior leadership were never able to come up with. From as they say, I'm not being disrespectful when I say this, but like it's like they say about children, it's like out of the mouths of babes. Your people have been watching what's going on, and they have great ideas. You may or may not be able to implement them all, but engage those people so that you can get there. And once you figured out what you can redesign and move forward on a new organizational design and a healthy organization, like what's the measure that you'll know that once you get there? It is more, there's something way more important than being perfect is just to have an answer. And you want to have an answer as you build this plan that's directionally correct and that everyone is committed to. And I highlight 75%. So General George Schwarzkopf, Norman Schwarzkopf, sorry, Stormin Norman he's a four-star, U.S. four-star general who commanded the armed forces and the coalition forces in the first Gulf War in the early 90s when the invasion of Kuwait and into Iraq. But he had this saying that the quality of your decision will not improve knowing 75% of the information available. And what he was saying was sort of like an end run around that line about analysis paralysis. What he was saying was at a certain point, you have enough information. You can make a plan, you can make a decision, and then you can move forward. And if you waited until all of the conditions were perfect and all the information was available, that you would likely never be able to get a better decision than what you had at that stage at the 75% line. So I would say make a plan. Now, implement your plan. Now, what most people fail to do, lots of organizations fail to do, and some that I've been involved with, is they don't monitor and watch the plan as it unfolds and make adjustments as you go along. This plan cannot be commandments 11 through 15 etched in stone. It is a living, when they say living document, it's a living, breathing thing. And as you bump into things that allow you to take an opportunity, take it. If there's risks and things you bump into the challenge, then you need to manage that risk. So how you get around this is you have to answer the question, like, why are we even here? Like, what is the purpose of your organization? It should not just be running a profitable, making money kind of ideal. It should be idealistic, something lofty and high-minded. And that at the same time, then you need to consider, how are you going to talk to your people about where do they fit into that? Why is their work important to this other goal? Now, we don't always have great, lofty, high-minded, ambitious goals, but a great story, you may have heard me say it before, was in the early 60s when President Kennedy was visiting NASA. He bumped into a caretaker and a janitor, and he asked him what he did at NASA, and the janitor said, "Sir, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." So that man, that caretaker, janitor, probably one of the lowest people in the food chain in the organization, clearly understood that the work he was doing fit into the larger goal. And if you don't understand, if you can't quite come to the terms with the question, why do we exist, then just keep asking the why again until that purpose is. Why? You can almost go to at least 3 levels about why are we here. And if someone gives you an answer, then prod again, poke again, and prod again with another why until you get to the nub, that really important core. The second thing, as we come through COVID and into the future, or any crisis, as we come into the future, is what are the things that define the organization's personality and behavior? Some organizations are unhealthy in a way because there's a lot of passive aggressive nonsense going on there. Some are very, I'll say macho, it's not maybe the right word, but they're very aggressive and very strong. And some are gentle and kind and believe in looking after people. So you might take a look at two examples in the giant corporate world. One is a Walmart model, and one is a Costco model, where in the Costco model, their values are that we will pay people better, give them benefits, treat them well. They will stay with us a long time, and we will make good money. Whereas on a Walmart side, their values are, okay, let's drive costs down. Let's beat up suppliers until we get the price we need to make money. So that I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I think I have a preference if I was an employee of one or the other. But there's two companies delivering similar service or product, but with completely different behavior models. And if you're clear about how your personality and your behavior, your organization's personality and behavior is, then knowing those core values will allow you to be punished for living up to the values. And when I say that, what I'm saying is that you can make short-term painful decisions and absorb short-term pain for long-term gain because you know it's the right thing to do. So one example would be when we reorganized big giant organizational restructuring within Red Cross across Western Canada. We went from individual administrative regions into provincial bodies. One of our values was nobody would lose their job over this restructure. This was not a cost-saving exercise. This was an organizational design exercise. And even though we bumped into some things that the easy answer would have been to let somebody go or lay people off, our values at that time said that, no, that wasn't the right thing to do. We have to live by these values. So we took a short-term hit, but our organization was stronger, better in the long run. And what we do, it's the simplest of these questions, and it's the basic activities of the organization. And I would say that if you're clear on what you do, then what this saves you from is mission creep and organizational morphing, and even certainly in a lot of companies right now, and it was endemic. Believe it was endemic in lots of not-for-profits. It was chasing a grant and then building a system and a program around a grant, as opposed to, okay, what's our core belief here? What's our core purpose for being on Earth? I know lots of organizations are not always the best at that, but it allows you to say, no, we're not doing that. This is not what we do. It also may run counter to our values and our organizational health. So it just helps you be clear. It doesn't mean that you can't do that or shouldn't do that, but it allows you to be very thoughtful about how you move forward. And how will we succeed in the future? So what are the anchors? So we call them anchors or KPIs, key performance indicators, or another language that we could use that will allow us to inform and evaluate every move we make. And these indicators or anchors will give us the clarity and courage to overcome strategies, because we all bump into shiny things and we have a hard time sometimes staying on course. I'm involved with an organization, a faith-based organization, great people, and we're looking, before COVID, looking at amalgamating another building or another congregation into our church and bringing them into a two-campus type of a church organization. But I've been involved with it for a long time, and my comment was, I think it's a pretty good idea, but I don't believe that we have the organizational discipline and clarity about what we're doing here to stay focused on this long enough to make sure that the amalgamation works well. There's research in the health sector out of New Zealand. In the 80s and 90s, New Zealand went through a series of governments, minority and different governments. Every 2 years, a government would change, and every 2 years, that government would change the healthcare system into a different model because it wasn't working. Well, the issue really was that they found out, studies have shown, that a big organizational change takes at least 2 years to fully implement to the point where you start reaping rewards from that change. So what was happening in New Zealand was just when they were about to see rewarding from the work they invested in the change from the previous government, the next government changed the system and reorganized the whole thing and upset it all. So if we don't have the clarity about the indicators that are going to be successful by these anchors that I'm talking about, we're apt to get distracted by shiny things or hard things or risks that will not allow us to move forward and reap the gains that we should be able to get. And what's the most important thing? It ties back to the short-term rallying cry that I would suggest everybody needs for the immediate COVID. But I would say this is a little bit more like we bump into this a lot. Too many priorities, too many things to focus on that we fail to succeed. And again, what's the important work? And this should be the number one agenda item on every leadership team meeting. What is the one thing, what is the most important thing we need to be working on to move ourselves forward? And how can we all develop that? And I've been in, I'm sure lots of you have been in meetings like this where every department head has their own important thing to work on, but they're not aligned to what the organization needs at that time. So if you can't bring people together, then you're going to have a problem. And then finally, who must do what? And when you have these conversations with your team, might be a leadership team or it might be your own work team, everybody must be 100% clear and unambiguous about what their responsibilities are when they walk out that door, and they have to commit. And they can't commit with, yeah, that's okay, or the kiss of death in any relationship, personal relationship conversation, that's fine. It has to be, do you fully understand what we have to do here? And are you committed? So when you walk out that door and go back to your own team, that you can bring them along with an equal level of commitment and drive that we need here. This is probably the least paid attention to component of a leadership team, or any team for that matter, in that that's being unambiguously clear about what people have to do and then following up. This is called being a boss and being a leader. And in fact, almost being micromanagement in a good sense, like being on top of people and what they're doing and how they're doing their job. So that's the end of the official, and like I say, we have a small but mighty group here we can have a conversation with. I'm going to unmute everybody, but just before we get to that point, I would suggest that I've been offering everybody on these calls and all of my clients and new friends, all the help that I can give them to. It's of no charge. It's just what I feel is the right thing to do given this time. Zoom building, team building exercises, helping to develop that rallying cry. I'm doing one next week with a small manufacturer about how to develop that team rallying cry, or if someone just needs an ear to listen to. And then of course, if you haven't got it, you can always get a copy of my book. So I'm going to unmute and feel free to jump in. I know it won't be too much trouble because there's only a couple of us, but that's cool.
Thanks, Steve. That was good. Lots of stuff there.
Yeah.
Remarkable stuff. And so I sort of taking notes as I think that when you started talking about the accident and your work on the plane crash, and you were sort of framing that as one thought that came to my mind as you were talking about that is that it had stages to it that were somewhat known, and different groups would take responsibility. Like you said, the police had overall responsibility, but then different folks moved in at different times.
Yeah.
And how that type of incident gives you a frame, and a lot of disaster recovery would be very similar to that.
Sure.
Right. So I mean, you would get the humanitarian stuff and then the rebuild and whatever the stages. Where this crisis is so much different in that we don't have a sense of what those stages are, or the stages we thought we had are much longer or much more powerful.
I would argue that it's spread out. It's
Yeah. So maybe we know, well, kind of, I guess in some ways, yeah. For society, we're going to get back to a gathering some way. For me, in my work, and just I work with nonprofit organizations at sort of the governance and management level for those, or the one who doesn't know what I do. we don't know what we're going to get back to. We're not going to return to that pre-pandemic state, but it's not like we can envision what that state is going to be. And how do you manage a crisis, stages of crisis in leadership, when you don't know what the future is going to be? Not when it's going to be, but what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. But I think too that to kind of reframe something I might have said earlier, the underlying assumption that I'm approaching this is that it won't be the same. It can't be the same.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, what do you think it might be? How will you position yourself better in the future? And I think that, yes, there are all these stages of, I would argue, sorry, Sheila, but I'm not sure your background, but both Mike and I have had experience with long-term community recovery post-disaster. And, you can kind of see the approach of that. But at the end, you have like, okay, we're going to have a new community here at the end of this day. So I would argue that even with COVID, at 6 months from now, you're going to have a new company. It might be the same name, same people, but it's going to be new. And the work you're going to do, if not new, will be done differently. So as you move forward, I think the analogy between the plane crash is like, this is our goal. This is our mission. And as you move forward, that's the one thing everybody can hang their hat on as you go through. So it could be, we'll use family resource centers across Alberta. A lot of them were half winding down, but some of them have the ability to reframe themselves, and they're looking at the work that they're going to be doing, and they're saying, well, now COVID's here, the demand has gone up, but we have to do it in a completely different way. And at the end of this, we don't want to disappear when COVID's over. We want to be an organization that's doing all this good work. So I don't know if I've answered your question 100%, Mike, because I don't know that I have a perfect answer for you. But
I'm not sure there is one. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I think, as you say, a lot of this is very adaptive and emergent, and I mean, I like that sort of almost rapid time process. You have to do a lot of time here. You don't do the process you laid out once.
Yeah.
You probably got to do this repeatedly sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It's that, what do we
Potentially
need to do today? What's the most important right now? The window's probably not 12 months. It could be this week. It could be this month. Yeah, I think that's.
Oh, yeah, and that mission, it has to be specific enough, but it's also the thing that changes, right? So depending on your operating tempo, like whatever's going on. But, for example, one group that I'm working with, everybody's at home, but nobody knows what we're doing some work, but they don't know exactly why they're doing it. Like, they're not sure they're busy, but they're being all day busy because somebody's paying them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you were able to develop this rallying cry about what the organization might look like in 6 months' time or a year's time, everybody should start thinking about how do we move forward with that. Does that make sense?
It does. I think there's a lot of that out there. I get a scan of sort of what's happening in the nonprofit or community sector from the Alberta government every week. It used to be 2 pages long. Now it's 10 today. Somebody is spending all their time just Googling everything that happens out there to keep their job in the Alberta government. And you think, it's okay, you're busy, but I don't know that you're really adding value right now. So.
Well, I've been lucky over the last bit, not lucky, but I've been out and about a bit over the last little while and on the roads, and I'm thinking, what were all those people doing that used to be on the roads?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to run anybody's job down, but I'm thinking, what's going on?
Yeah.
What are they going to do when they come back? What are the companies going to look like? I mentioned Karna, the nurses, like, they're doing things faster, quicker now because they have to, like registering new nurses and stuff like that. They've had imagine, this is 2020, and they've had their first video hearing tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they wanted to do it, because they had to do it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah.
I don't know, Sheila, do you have anything? If you can talk or type, feel free to jump in here.
Well, I have a question then, a
Yeah, go
thought.
ahead. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was thinking this when you talk about I do agree you got to get, oh, okay. Well, thanks, Sheila.
Oh, okay.
Um, um, the idea, I love the idea of you get everybody through the room and you figure out what we're all about and what we're collectively about, the rallying cry.
Hmm.
But also, I think what I'm starting to see is the difference between different parts of an organization, the difference between governance and management right now,
Yeah.
and where people's eyes have to be or are. I had a board meeting last week, and and then you go to the board meeting on a Tuesday night, and you think a certain way, and I came back in as an executive director the next morning, and you think in a different way, and just how those roles are kind of shifting right now. I think the roles of boards and what they think is most important in the now will be dramatically different than what the day-to-day I need to deliver service is going to look like. And
Hmm.
so it's those tensions that that will be magnified right now, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think, based on not just recent experience, but I think one of the risks I see happening in a lot of, certainly not for profit, but probably in for-profit organizations, although I don't have a full sense of this, is the staff getting out ahead of the board.
Mhm.
Like starting to be innovative and starting to do maybe these kind of exercises that we're talking about here, about what is this going to look like in the future, but not bringing the owners' representatives, who are the board, uh, it, it, along with them, and all of a sudden it's a surprise.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's when I think, certainly in the not-for-profit sector, you and I know lots of people that have lost their jobs uh, in challenges with the board. And quite frankly, I think that they've gotten too far ahead of the board, even in normal times, in peacetime, right? And
yeah,
now we're in this high intensity time, and I think people are at risk of getting too far ahead of them again.
yeah, absolutely. Or who's going to be conservative and who's going to want to be innovative, or who's going to be daring, or who has
Yeah,
more information.
yeah.
I don't know if you've been watching The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan story on Netflix.
Oh no, I haven't, but yeah, I want to. Yeah,
It's a remarkable, and the story is wonderful. And if you don't like basketball or Michael, it's a well done story. But the idea of being a manager, a general manager, or a coach, or a player, and where leadership and power lies, it's fascinating.
oh,
It is,
interesting.
it's quite remarkable. As even in your talking, I'm sort of thinking, okay, a lot of this now is almost like coaching, where you're developing a game plan, where in the game you've got to adjust.
Yeah.
You're not the GM who's calling long-term strategy. It's you've things were going on. You got to adjust so quick. And I think there's different almost metaphors or frames to think about crisis leadership that
Yeah.
you don't necessarily do in sort of or normal day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. There's a model, I don't know if you're aware, or if you know who Stanley McChrystal is, General McChrystal.
He was the Afghanistan guy, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
yeah,
Yeah,
he was the guy that got fired after the Rolling
yeah,
Stone
yeah,
for bad mouthing Mr. President Obama.
yeah.
But to his point, so I think he's actually quite an interesting guy. But there's the guy behind him is a fellow by the name of Mark Fussell, and so I think he's actually the brains behind the organization, to be perfectly honest. But fair enough. But they wrote a book called, the first book is called Team of Teams, and it's about bringing all of these disparate organizations, everything from Canadian CSIS and the Canadian Special Forces to the British MI5, FBI and CIA and State Departments, and all of these organizations together in a way that could actually get stuff done, because they were, when he first took over in Iraq, I can't remember the exact stats, but they were doing one raid on an enemy position. The Special Forces were only doing like one raid maybe every 10 days or once a week. And when he left, he built the system up where they were operating like 5, 6, 7 times a night doing these high intensity things. But the way they did it was they got everybody in the room working all virtually, but they decided on an operating tempo. So how fast are things changing in your environment? How fast do you have to respond to things? And they developed this operating tempo that they brought everybody together around these rallying cries, that everybody could be super focused.
Mm-hmm.
And then they shared this information. Anybody in the whole organization could get on this call and they could hear what was happening. So when they were out doing their own work, they started making better decisions quicker because they understood what was happening. So I
Yeah,
think,
there's a fear in some organizations, and
yeah,
fear is not the worst thing, but that if I share too much, right? If I share too much of what's going on, the potential downside that people start worrying about their jobs, they'll start worrying
oh yeah,
about whatever. And I get that. That's where we're all in
yeah,
that same boat. But without sharing, you don't get any of that. You can't get to that rallying cry place, right? So
yeah,
it's hard to navigate that sometimes. And you think, the idea that you call, you always put these calls up, we're all in this together kind of stuff when it's in crisis. And then you start planning your way out of it. You sort of re-entrench into the few,
yeah.
and how hard that is to manage that, I think.
Well, we have the human brain when they're facing a crisis. The natural instinct is to narrow your focus, right?
Yeah.
Be task oriented, because that's how we stayed alive when the saber-toothed tiger was going to jump out of the woods and eat us. Like, it wasn't time to think about existential thoughts about whether the tiger's in a good mood or not. It was like, get out of there. So our brain is designed, and there's been research done that if you face a crisis, your peripheral vision shrinks and your hearing starts shutting down. And the rational part, the thinking part of your brain starts shutting off. So it's all reactive. So what we have to do is build safety, trust and safety and values that people feel comfortable, even though they know it's dangerous. They know that there's a chance you could, and nobody should be so bold as to say, don't worry, your job is secure forever. But how do you have that conversation in a way that gives people comfort and protection so that they can get out of that reactive mindset and start thinking bigger, longer, further out?
Yeah, I just wrote about that last night, and the idea of having to have that discipline, that when you got to face I quoted James Stockdale, but the idea of how you
Oh yeah,
got to face the brutal facts, right? You got to
yeah,
face there, but how that's not the type of discipline, certainly is nonprofit leaders we have sometimes. Our discipline lies elsewhere. It
yeah,
is that community side, that
yeah,
inclusive side, that programmatic side, but that discipline to say, I got to make some really hard choices and do those with you is a different type of different discipline right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the essence, I would argue. It is the essence of true leadership, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being a manager.
Yeah. But it is so much different than the military model, right? Where it is a command and control, even if that's not really
Yeah,
totally true a lot of times in terms of getting responses, right?
yeah,
How do you, but when you're talking, I'm thinking this is interesting from a military perspective, from that background versus the rallying cry. There'd be
yeah,
rallying cries in the military world, one too, but are they
yeah,
around patriotism or around, our way of life? So I think
yeah, yeah.
the different
Well,
way
that's
of leading.
interesting. Yeah. Well, no, truly, trust me when I've seen this, nobody dies for their country. They'll die for their friends. So, and I've often said this, Mike, and maybe I'm not with you, but others, I've never had the freedom to do my job as I did in the military. Somebody told me what they wanted, what was the goal they wanted done, and then they let me go do it. Oh, they also told me what I wasn't allowed to do, which was like, you can't go over there, you can't spend this, you can't whatever. But I think there's some lessons, could be transferable skills here around how do you allow people to bring their best in, and if everybody believes in the same values, um, that they know, like nobody, like I said, I don't think if you went into a organization today and said, don't worry about it, nobody's going to lose their job, everyone would know you're lying.
Mhm.
Or not, or extremely naive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you said, look, our values are that no one's going to lose their job unless the worst case scenario is, and we will tell you well in advance what that's going to start looking like, then people go, okay. Mike, that we've had a cancer scare in our family, and as soon as the doctor said what it was like, oh, that was big relief. It
Mhm.
nobody was happy about it, but we knew what we were facing, and
Yeah.
then you can start making good decisions.
Yeah. I mean, it just changes the whole. It does lighten things where we gotten.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not shadow boxing against a strange monster. You have you have something that you're all working towards. So,
Yeah. Remember
yeah,
that invited not to work at my last job. It was a relief when it finally
Yeah.
happened. It was to say, okay, this is a, because you're dealing with that the whole time.
Yeah.
And I even think that you're right. When you see people want to talk and they're already talking about, I think you mentioned that in your first podcast, was that, your staff are already talking about layoffs. If they're not, I mean, they're not paying attention because
That's for sure.
somehow they're not noticing the rest of the world. So don't be afraid to talk about it. And you can't promise things you can't promise, but it is, I think you go back and forth as a leader on this stuff, saying, I've got this responsibility to keep things going and protect your jobs and protect the organization. And that does tend to that's good, but it tends to take you down a path, whereas you think, you folks are assets. I have all these assets to make those things happen, not that I need to protect you. And so, or to keep you busy, or to manage your work, or micromanage your work. And sometimes you're right these days. But how do I unleash you as an asset? And that's kind of my working premise today is, okay, I'm going to treat you as an asset today. And what do you need to do to get us somewhere? So
yeah. Well, exactly. Well, I just know, like, based on, like, even when we amalgamated basically 3 business units into one when I was with Red Cross, like, I went to the people and said, okay, this is what we got to do. Let's figure this out. And there were infinitely there, and I mentioned this somewhere the other day, was like, the people that would work for me were like, I don't ever remember being that smart. I was like, these guys were millennials, they were in their 30s. Now they're all likely a little older, but at the time they're probably around in their early 30s. And I'm thinking, holy shit, these people are freaking brilliant. Now, what they needed some coaching and some, I would say, my wisdom, because I'm an old guy, but they brought answers to the table that were far outside of my modest expectations. I thought it was a team building exercise to make sure everybody was engaged, and it became this huge resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A powerful resource. Oh my gosh.
It does. So it's refreshing, right? So
yeah. And hopeful.
I need to step off and go to the washroom before my next call.
Yeah, Mike.
Too much difference in a small group, but hey, it's
That was fun. I'm glad you were there, Mike.
No, I really enjoyed this. This is so much better than Zoom calls with 20 people where you don't really get to engage. So this is my time, so I hope it was worth yours.
And Sheila's down there making notes like crazy.
I would hope so. This is
you're listening to 2 smart guys.
I got an offer for you on taking you up on some of your services. We got some groups in Cochrane who want to talk more in the business continuity world, but I mean,
So,
hey, we could probably
give me a shout. I'm good. Next week's not bad, Mike.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Okay, take care. Hey, Sheila, that was pleasant. Nice of you to say, Sheila. Sorry you didn't have a microphone. I'd like to hear your cheering voice. If you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to me. Just drop me a note. If you have my emails there, and you can contact me through the website. So. Yeah, you too, Sheila. All the best. Try to put some sand in your pockets. I hear it's supposed to get windy down there to keep weighted down. Take care. Nice to see you. Bye now.